So those who are online, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And can you see the shared screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yes. Okay, guys, whenever you have a question, those sitting here and those who are online, you can ask the question. So keep yourselves mute, but whenever you have a question, just unmute yourself and ask the question, no problem. Okay. And later you can, if you have question, you can come to my office or you can email me, but only come with those questions which are not explained in the lecture. Sometimes I get emails which were clearly explained in the lecture, but probably the student did not go to listen, like did not listen to the video or did not attend the lecture. Just looking at the PowerPoint, a question comes to mind and they just send the email. So then it becomes difficult to type the answer which was already explained. So if there's something not explained, you are free to ask any questions now or later, no problem. Okay, so let's start. Like how many online do we have? Like we have enough?
Ready.
Okay. So today we'll talk about opioid agonists and antagonists. So you have done the pain physiology lecture. So you know the pain pathway. And to control the pain, you know, we use analgesics and there are different types. We did one type during the POD block. And so today we'll talk about opioid analgesics, okay? So these slides were, Dr. Dilip used to give this lecture previously, so these were his slides. So I just updated them a little bit and so. So why we need to talk about opioids for like 1 hour, why it is important? Because of their widespread use and their potential of abuse. Like we have more data from US. So opioid addiction and deaths due to overdose have reached a very alarming level in US and also in some other countries as well. And around 40,000 Americans die because of overdose of opioids every year. And there are around 2.4 million people have opioid use disorder. So the main indication for opioids is pain, so for analgesia, but then they have potential for abuse and addiction. So that's the problem. Now about local data, I tried to look for the local data. Unfortunately, we don't have any good data about the opioids which are used as analgesics in hospitals, like by the doctors. We don't have good data on that. We have some data on drugs of abuse like heroin and other drugs. But again, that data is not like a population-based study. It's only from those centers where patients are admitted for rehabilitation in Saudi Arabia. Because so illegal and the punishment so grave, so like you don't get enough data from the population. Now, in one of the studies which was done in such centers in Saudi Arabia, they talked about among those patients, like opioids were around 35%, among 35% patients. In another study, they said the amphetamines were more common than opioids. So we are not sure about the local data. So our learning objectives would be to identify various opioid receptors with their localization. So our body has opioid receptors, and because we have endogenous opioid peptides in our body. So we'll talk about them as natural analgesics, and then we'll classify opioids based on their pharmacological actions, and we'll obviously discuss their mechanisms of action, pharmacokinetic properties, clinical uses, adverse effects of opioid analgesics as well as antagonists. So there's another category, opioid antagonists, which we use for overdose. So we'll talk about them as well. All of you can hear me clearly? Okay. If any, at any moment, if like I slow down, if my voice is not that loud, let me know. So before that, you already know about pain. So I don't need to go into details of pain and its pathways. So what is pain?
Unpleasant experience.
Yes, unpleasant experience. So unpleasant sensory and emotional experience with actual or potential tissue damage. And you must have experienced pain. Everybody has experienced pain for one or the other reason. But have you felt that sometimes the same problem, the same injury, feels more painful than at other times? So the same stimulus produces different degree of pain perception depending on other factors in the same person. Similarly, in two people, the same injury may give a different experience, a different intensity of pain. Like fractured bone. Somebody can hold the fractured bone and just walk with that. Others may become unconscious because of the intensity of the pain. So that means there are lots of other modulators which modify or which modulate our experience, our perception, or awareness of pain. So I hope in physiology you have done all that, the pain pathway as well as its the modulation. Any idea? Like, so how the modulation is done?
Midbrain preaqueductal.
Okay, periaqueductal gray, you mean?
Yes.
In the midbrain. Okay. Any other factors which play a role?
The release of endorphins and
Okay, yes. So that's the natural opioid analgesics that we have. Yes. And our emotional state. So the input from the limbic system, input from the hypothalamus, all play a role. And those who are online, if you want to answer, just unmute yourself and answer. No problem. I hope they are allowed to unmute. Because I'm not following the chat. So if you're if you're writing questions in chat, so at the moment I'm not looking at the chat. So if you have question or comment, if you want to answer, just say it. Okay. Sorry. Can
Can you use the mic, please?
you cannot hear me? Okay. So, but do we have an additional mic? Because the mic. Like I think I'm loud enough. If you have if you want to sit here, no problem. I don't know with this, it might modify your perception be for those who are online. What are the clips or hold it? Okay. Now can you hear me? I think this will create a problem. Now can you hear me? Okay. Those at the back, can you hear me? Okay. Because I was trying to follow the rules, so we should be role models for you. But I don't know. Hmm? No, I have no problem removing the mask, but the mask is for the protection of others. Sorry? Voice is not clear? It's clear. Okay. So let me do one more thing. I would Switch off the video. I should have done it before. Okay. So pain pathways. So it starts from the receptors. So if there's a noxious stimulus, it will stimulate a receptor which is a nerve ending, and we call that nociceptors. Okay. So nociceptors are nerve endings that respond to noxious stimuli, and these noxious stimuli may, which can actually or potentially produce tissue damage. So that's nociceptor. From what happens from the stimulation of the nociceptors? Transduction through, okay, afferent nerve fibers. Usually, which type of nerve fibers propagate the, okay, A gamma or A delta? A delta and C fibers, yes. And then it goes to,
Okay.
yeah, ventral horn or dorsal horn? Dorsal. And then spinothalamic, second order neuron, the spinothalamic tract, and it decussets at that level, and then it goes up. So these receptors are stimulated by, the nociceptors are stimulated by prostaglandins, histamine, serotonin, bradykinin, potassium ions, hydrogen ions. This is the local transmission, the stimulation of the nociceptors. And then from there, as you said, A delta and C fibers carry the sensation. Now, probably I think I've shown you the same picture when we talked about NSAIDs. Now here in this picture, can you identify different locations where we can potentially modulate pain sensation? Okay, one is spinal cord, okay. Yes, so that's a spinal cord, dorsal root ganglion. Oh yeah, dorsal root ganglion and the spinal cord, yes. Sorry? Okay, side of tissue, very good. So side of tissue damage, dorsal root ganglion, spinal cord, yes. And then we have other areas. So we are just up to spinal cord at the moment. Like we will go later, supraspinal. Now, can you identify any things which can be used at the site of injury to decrease the pain? NSAIDs, very good. So that's what we talked about in POD. NSAIDs, acetaminophen or paracetamol. What about here, like at the nerve root, dorsal root ganglion? Sorry? Anesthetics, local anesthetics, which you have already done. And now we will talk about what we can do at the spinal cord level and above that. So opioids will work at this level. So spinal cord and above that. So ascending pathway. Now this is the whole pathway where how can I modify the cursor? I think you guys prefer a different cursor. Okay. Yeah. So as you know from the stimulus, then nociceptor, and then we go to the peripheral nerve, dorsal root ganglion, and the dorsal horn. This is synapse with second order neuron, decussation to the opposite side, and then it goes to the through the lateral spinothalamic tract and to the pons and medulla, reticular formation, and from there goes to the thalamus, which is the sensory relay center, and from thalamus it goes to the somatosensory cortex for the localization of the painful stimulus. And then we have inputs from hypothalamus and limbic system. So stress response, emotional responses. Okay. So you have done all these things. Okay. So now descending pain modulatory pathways. I won't go into detail, but as you can see, this is very important that from cerebral cortex and from hypothalamus. Okay. So we have descending pathways which come to the midbrain, and again in the periaqueductal gray, and they come to the medulla oblongata, and from there we have reticulospinal tract, and where the fibers can end on the interneurons, the inhibitory interneurons, and when they are stimulated, they will inhibit the second order neurons, will decrease the perception of the pain, or they can inhibit the endings of the first order neuron, like these nerve terminals, so it can inhibit directly over here. So it can inhibit and decrease the pain sensation. They can modulate the pain sensation. Okay. And obviously here we have role of substance P. So where is substance P? What is its role? Any idea?
It's reduced frequency
Okay.
high frequency and it will activate the instrument pain.
Also including what it is,
Okay.
So they increase the sensitivity of fever and pain.
Okay. And here in spinal cord, what is that area where we have this production of substance P and like this synapse formation of time
it's first of all,
first order and second order neurons, like the substantia gelatinosa. So okay. So besides substance P, so any idea like which neurotransmitters are involved, like when there's a painful stimulus? So glutamate, very good. So we glutamate with substance P. We have another thing, something calcitonin, generated peptide, something like that. Yeah. So we have different things which can, and that can lead to stimulation on the second order neuron, and which channels are involved, and calcium, NMDA, okay, and mTOR, yes. Okay. So again, so you know these pathways. Okay. So that's good. So it will help us. So now let's come to the opioids, because at this level we have the opioid receptors as well, like on both these neurons. So presynaptic as well as postsynaptic neurons, we have opioid receptors as well. And so when we have endogenous or exogenous opioid agonists, so they will modulate the pain transmission. Okay. Either they will modify the presynaptic potentials or postsynaptic potentials. We'll talk about it. So opioids are drugs which act on the opioid receptors. This is the simplest definition. So what are opioid receptors? Any idea? Yeah, mu receptors. So we have mu receptors, we have kappa receptors, and we have delta receptors. So three categories of receptors: mu, kappa, and delta. Among these, delta are not that medically important. They are in the brain, and they play a role in the pain modulation. But like we don't have many drugs which specifically work on delta, so we won't talk much about delta, but we'll focus mainly on mu and a little bit on kappa, because mu is the main receptor for the action of opioids and for the modulation of pain, for the analgesia. So let's talk about mu and kappa receptor activation. So what happens when we activate these receptors? So by activating the mu and kappa receptors, we can achieve analgesia. Now, how I'll tell you in a while that what happens when we activate mu receptor or kappa receptor at those nerve terminals. Probably if I'll let you know right now, it will be easier. So at the presynaptic neuron, when you stimulate an opioid receptor, for example, mu, kappa, delta, it will lead to decreased release of those transmitters like glutamate, as you said, because it will, for that, first you need to have calcium, and it closes the calcium channels. So it leads to decreased release of those transmitters from there. So it affects the first order neuron, and so there's not enough stimulation, painful stimulation going on to the second order neuron. That's how it produces analgesia. Also, so what it does on the second order neuron, and especially by mu receptors, it opens up the potassium channels, which leads to hyperpolarization. So that's kind of inhibit the postsynaptic potentials. So again, so the postsynaptic neuron is not able to depolarize that easily. So again, it decreases the pain sensation. So we have different responses, including analgesia. That's what we want. But along with that, it also produces sedation, respiratory depression. Now, again, when we speak of opioids and activation, so these are the effects which come because of the mu and kappa receptors. But when you speak of opioids, the drugs, they produce some other effects which are not mediated by these opioid receptors, which have other mechanisms as well. We'll talk about them. But here we're talking about the opioid receptor activation. So we have analgesia, sedation, respiratory depression. Now, these are unwanted effects. Euphoria, and that is part of like mainly drug abuse, and the like other drugs of abuse like heroin and all those things. They produce euphoria, dysphoria, decreased GI motility leading to constipation, physical dependence, addiction, and meiosis, the constriction of the pupils. So again, if you look at these effects like analgesia, sedation, respiratory depression, physical dependence, these are all shared by both mu and kappa stimulation. Both these receptors lead to these effects. Obviously, analgesia is much more achieved with the mu receptors than kappa receptors. Again, respiratory depression is again more pronounced with mu receptor activation. Physical dependence again more pronounced with mu receptor activation. But again, both of these are involved in these effects. But euphoria, GI, decreased GI motility, and meiosis, they are specific to mu receptors, while dysphoria is specific to kappa receptors. So if you give a drug which works more on kappa receptors, will produce dysphoria rather than euphoria. Euphoria is like you are happy. Dysphoria, you have more anxious, more like you're not happy. It's this altered mood, you can say. Like it's more unwanted state of mind. Like patients don't like that situation. They become anxious. They become worried. And so effects of opioid receptor activation. So all opioid receptors are G protein coupled receptors, and they inhibit adenylyl cyclase activity. So they are associated with the GI protein. Okay. So you remember your G proteins, huh? Okay. So this decreases the cyclic AMP and has two well-established actions on neurons, which I already talked about. One thing, it closes voltage-gated calcium channels on presynaptic nerve terminals, thereby reduces transmitter release. And this is achieved by all three types of receptors, mu, kappa, and delta. Okay. While the other effect is it hyperpolarizes and inhibits postsynaptic neurons by opening potassium channels. Okay. And this is only with the mu receptors. Okay, clear? So mechanism of action of opioids. We just start. This is the mechanism of action. So the primary, suppose here, if you're just at the peripheral nervous system and the spinal cord, so you have a primary efferent coming in, and at the presynaptic nerve terminal, you can have both like mu, kappa, delta. We don't have at this level. So mu kappa receptor causes decreased calcium and leading to decreased transmitter release. Okay. While at the postsynaptic neuron, with the help of mu receptors, there's opening of potassium channels and hyperpolarization. So this modulates the pain transmission at this level. But obviously, we have these actions going on in the brain as well. So we have, because if we have these receptors, so we have endogenous peptides, ligands as well. This is common sense why we have receptors if we don't have ligands. So we have endogenous opioid peptides. So these are like short sequences of amino acids, and they bind to opioid receptors in the brain. And these are beta endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphins. So these are three categories. Again, so there are different types of peptides. So we have three categories. And obviously we have these pre-pro proteins, and then but I don't want to go into that chemistry. But like we have three categories: beta endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphins. So endorphins, so they have more affinity for the mu receptors, mainly for the mu receptors, and they produce like natural analgesia. They induce feelings of euphoria, modulation of appetite, and they function as neurohormone as well. They decrease LH, FSH, they increase growth hormone and prolactin. So like these endorphins, these natural opioids, they are also secreted because of exercise. So many things that we do and makes us feel happier or makes us feel like less pain. So that is releasing actually the natural opioids, especially endorphins. So exercise has a role in that. Enkephalins, affinity mainly for delta and less for mu receptors. And its functions are regulation of pain and nociception at spinal and supraspinal levels. And dynorphins, affinity mainly for kappa and less for mu and delta receptors. Okay. So let's talk about localization of these receptors, where they are like located. So mainly the mu receptors are in the spinal cord, brainstem, periaqueductal gray, thalamus, cerebral cortex, and we have some mu receptors in gut as well. We have enteric plexus over there as well. With kappa, which is in the limbic system, hypothalamus, brainstem, spinal cord, and delta are in the cerebral cortex, nucleus accumbens, and amygdala. Have you done these structures or no? So, no? Yeah, probably you'll do it later. Yeah, because these nucleus accumbens, amygdala, these are more related with the limbic system and emotions and all those things. So you will do them later. Hypothalamus again, have probably not yet, huh? So when you do thalamus, and then probably at that time with basal ganglia, they might talk about hypothalamus as well. But it's more with the autonomic function and all those things, the hypothalamus. The limbic system is all about our primitive responses and its involvement with our reward system and addiction and all those. So it has major role in addiction. And you'll do probably in the coming weeks. So the problem with neuro is that it makes sense when you're about to finish. When everything gets together. So this is the overall like spread, but like don't worry about these things. Okay, so opioids. Do you identify what is this? Sorry? Yes, it's the poppy plant. Yes, you're right. So on the left-hand side, it's the poppy plant, and on the right-hand side, it's fruit, the fruit of the poppy plant. And you can see the white juice that is coming out of it. It has hundreds of natural alkaloids, and some of them, including morphine, is isolated from there, and then people make heroin out of it and all those things. And I think like this has been used like for thousands of years. It's not something new. This has existed in nature for thousands of years, and the like if you talk about some unauthentic references, you can find as back as 3000 BC, but the authentic reference which is given in some of the books is around 300 BC, when they talk about this plant and its analgesic effects. And the morphine compound was isolated by a German scientist, Frederick, I think, in early 19th century. And he named it morphine after the name of Greek god Morpheus. I think he's god of dreams or something like that. And morphine was causing the sedation and hallucinations and all those things. So that's how it was named as morphine. I think some people are saying something on chat as well. I don't know. They're not asking questions. Oops. So, and this is very important because history of opioids is very interesting. So opioids can be classified in different ways. One way is their activity on the opioid receptors. So we have agonists, we have mixed agonist, antagonist, and antagonist. So do you know what is meant by mixed agonist antagonist? Sorry? Depending on the concentration. So you increase the concentration, more effect, or you saying like at low concentration, one agonist and the higher concentration antagonist? Partial agonist, yes, that's one thing, but that we put them with agonist. So against we have full agonist and we have partial agonist. Yes, so like pentazocine is agonist at I think kappa and antagonist at the mu receptors. So we have mixed effect. And then we have antagonists. I'll come back to pentazocine, but like, so we have like mu, delta, kappa. So if a drug is agonist at one type and antagonist at the other type, so that's what we call mixed agonist antagonist. And then we have only agonists, and they may be full agonists or partial agonists. So when they are partial agonists, so they are not that efficacious. So efficacy changes, whether they are full or partial. And then we have antagonists like naloxone. And I haven't put all the names. There are so many names. So there's an naltrexone, and then there are other drugs as well which can be antagonists. Okay, so
Doctor,
yes,
can you hear me clearly?
yes,
Yes. Can I please ask a question if you
Yes.
don't mind?
yes, go ahead.
Yes. So when it comes to mixed agonists and antagonists, it's dependent on what it is used with.
Not it's used with. That's another thing. I'll come to that. But what I'm saying, this drug may be agonist at one type of receptor and antagonist at other type of opioid receptor. So we
Okay.
have different types of
So
opioid
they're
receptor.
dependent.
So it depends if they are like the same, like pentazocine is agonist at kappa and antagonist at mu.
Oh, okay. So the receptors themselves. Thank you.
Okay. So agonists, we have morphine, we have heroin, we have codeine, we have methadone, we have fentanyl, we have buprenorphine. And see, I have put this buprenorphine in both agonist as well as mixed agonist antagonist. The problem is some books say the buprenorphine is partial agonist, but some other books would say this is a mixed agonist antagonist. So there is not agreement which category it falls into. Here, for the sake of simplicity, it was put with the agonist, but only in this slide I mentioned it over there, so you remember that some books will put it with the mixed agonist antagonist as well. Okay. So, and besides it, we have many others as well, which I haven't listed, like, and a little bit semi-synthetic modifications. So like morphine is a natural opioid. Others, and codeine is also natural. The others are either semi-synthetic or synthetic, which are synthesized in the lab. And now even recently, the scientists have started using the yeast to synthesize these natural alkaloids as well. So morphine, instead of growing in the poppy plant, they can be synthesized now in the labs as well. So I just read that thing. So it's very something. So like morphine, so it can be hydromorphone, it can be oxymorphone, little variants, and they have different potency or different half-life, so different level of analgesia. Like codeine, again, it's a little bit of modification of morphine. It gets eventually metabolized to morphine in the body. But codeine, again, it can be again modified to oxycodone, hydrocodone. And that's what oxycodone is the most widely used as an analgesic in US, and that's what is most widely abused drug and causes addiction. And then you have many more as well. We have meperidine as well. That's also important. Okay, so let's talk about morphine. Morphine is the prototype opioid agonist. That's the gold standard. And against this, we compare all other opioids. Whether when we speak of analgesia or some other effects, we compare against the morphine. Like how much analgesia is compared to morphine, this much. Dose compared to morphine, this much. And it's agonist mainly at mu receptors, used in moderate to severe pain, and can be used intramuscularly, intravenously, or orally. But again, orally, we have different formulation. We have sustained release formulation. We have normally when they go through first pass metabolism and decreases the concentration. But we have sustained release formulations as well. So pharmacologic actions of morphine: analgesia, sedation, respiratory depression, and this is the most common cause of death in overdose. In acute overdose, so respiratory depression is the most common cause of death. It causes euphoria, antiperistalsis, so it can lead to urinary retention, constipation, pupil reconstriction or meiosis, depression of cuff reflex. So again, these lead to depression of cuff reflex as well. Opioids, especially morphine, codeine. Codeine is used in cough syrup as antitussive. So cough, something which reduces the cough, we call that antitussive. So you might see this term somewhere, antitussive. So don't. Antitussive means something which reduces the cough. Okay. And obviously they lead to nausea and vomiting. We'll come to that as well. So it also causes the dilation of capacitance and resistance vessels, so veins and arteries. So morphine also causes peripheral histamine release and thus vasodilation, and in some patients bronchoconstriction. It can lead to vomiting, and that happens through non-opioid mechanisms. So there are many effects of these opioids which happen through some other mechanism, not through the opioid receptors. One of them is like this vomiting, which is direct stimulation of CTZ. Do you know what is CTZ? Chemoreceptor trigger zone in medulla, in vomiting center, or like I think it's area postrema. Okay. So it causes direct stimulation of this chemoreceptor trigger zone, leading to vomiting. And it causes spasms of the sphincter of OD. Remember a sphincter of OD? No? So the common bile duct opens in the duodenum. So there's a sphincter which is called the sphincter of OD. So it causes the spasm at that sphincter. So obviously it will increase the intrabiliary pressure. So you don't give morphine to relieve the biliary colic. So if somebody is having biliary pain or pancreatitis pain, you don't give morphine to relieve that pain, because it will worsen that. It will increase the intrabiliary pressure. Okay. Is that clear? Clinical uses mainly is the pain relief. So morphine is used for pain relief, more effective in relieving continuous dull pain than sharp intermittent pain. It's also useful in acute pulmonary edema. Now, this is the only indication. Otherwise, because the opioids cause respiratory depression, so you don't use opioids in people who have respiratory dysfunction. Okay, like if you look at the contraindications, this may be one of the countries. Someone who has respiratory problems, you don't use opioids. But pulmonary edema is the only one place where the morphine can be useful, because it reduces the preload on heart due to venodilation, So it improves the preload and the pulmonary edema, as well as because of this patient is like anxious because they are not able to breathe. So it kind of calms them down. So that's why morphine is helpful. It's not the primary treatment, but it's helpful. Obviously, you need to get rid of the fluid and you need to improve the heart contractility. So obviously, the management is few other things. But this can help as well if available. So this can be historically, morphine has been used as antitussive. Probably now the codeine is more used, not the morphine, and also diarrhea. Now again, we don't use because it causes constipation, but now we don't use morphine for diarrhea. The only opioid that we use for diarrhea is loperamide, and which acts on the and does not cross the blood-brain barrier. So it acts only peripherally, and it acts on the gut mu receptors in the anterior plexus, and causes constipation. So that can be used in diarrhea where you want to like reduce the gut processes. So that's loperamide. Morphine adverse effects: sedation, respiratory depression, constipation, vomiting, rise in intravenous pressure, so contraindicated pain due to biliary colic and pancreatitis. And obviously, it's not, but like one of the features is pupillary meiosis. Okay. So we talk about morphine, but we have heroin, codeine, methadone, fentanyl, buprenorphine, inlet. So heroin is called diamorphine. It's diamorphine. It's the main drug of abuse in illicit drug market. I hope all of you have heard about heroin. Okay, and I'm not talking about the movie heroines. Okay. Rapidly converted to morphine and 6-monoacetylmorphine. Its actions are similar to those of morphine, although it is more potent as an analgesic when given by injection. But because it is more potential for abuse, so and it's illicit, so it's not used for that purpose. Only in few countries, in some hospitals, it is used for that purpose. Otherwise, most of the countries, it's like prohibited. So, and obviously not in Saudi Arabia. So there's, I think, a death penalty if you're found with here. So diamorphine is used as analgesic in some hospitals in few countries in terminally ill patients. So logic is, now you're not worried about those patients whether they will become addicted to heroin or not. They are terminally, they are going to die. Just you want them to have a little bit better time. So it's used in some countries. Codeine is a natural content of opium, has low affinity for opioid receptors, and its analgesic effect results from its metabolism to morphine. But it's 10 times less in potency compared to morphine. And it's used for moderate pain and as a cough suppressant. Again, diarrhea probably historical, but not now. And obviously, as you know, constipation, nausea, these are the common side effects, and as well as addiction, dependence. These are the major problems. Methadone. Now, it's a synthetic opioid, and it's used commonly in addicts. So when you are trying to rehabilitate the addicts, so it's again an opioid agonist. But while controlling, like during the rehabilitation phase, you use like to control the symptoms, you use methadone because it has less potential for addiction and it's a long acting. So this is where it's commonly used, and also in cancer and chronic non-malignant pain as well, because long acting, so you can use it in chronic pain as well. So primary feature is this long duration of action due to extensive protein binding. Half-life is 20 to 45 hours, so it's suitable for long-term use. Fentanyl, again, is very, very potent analgesic. So 100 times more potent than morphine, and it's used in anesthesia. It's also used in combination with benzodiazepines to produce procedural sedation, like in endoscopies, cardiac catheterizations, oral surgeries. And it has a rapid onset and very short half-life. And it can be given per enteral infusion and transdermal patches. And again, all these drugs have some other, like there's sufentanil and there are other fentanyl types, the derivatives of fentanyls. which may be used in different ways. So again, I don't know, probably some of you might know. So the Chechen fighters once took hostages in Moscow theater in 2002. Does anyone know about this incident? There are 40 to 50 fighters and hundreds of hostages. So again, the Russian authorities, they used, because it was so well planned and so there was no way of getting the hostages. So in the end, they used a gas through the ventilation system, the authorities, which sedated everybody. And there's no official story, but like the theory is they use some derivative of fentanyl. And because of that, some hostages also died. Because this fentanyl, again, it has certain metabolites, which can be very toxic. We don't have time to go into that, but there's otherwise interesting history as well. So buprenorphine is a partial agonist at mu receptors. It's a partial agonist, occupies a much larger fraction of the receptor to produce analgesic effect. And if you want to antagonize it, you need to use a larger dose of the antagonist in terms of overdose. And the major use is opioid detoxification. Again, so someone who is opioid addict and now you want to detoxify. So I said you use methadone, but methadone is a longer term. But as a bridging, you can use buprenorphine as a detox, and then you can go on to methadone until they are off the opioids. And because it has shorter and less severe withdrawal symptoms. So now let's come to the pentazocine. So it's mainly on the kappa receptors. So agonist on the kappa receptors. So it produces analgesia, sedation, hallucinations through disturbances and thought disturbance and dysphoria. It blocks, so antagonist of the mu receptors. Okay. So you don't give it with other opioid agonists. So you don't give it with mu agonist. So suppose if someone is already on morphine and if you give them pentazocine, they will go into withdrawal of morphine and they will have more problems because it will block the mu receptors. So effect of the morphine will go down. Okay. And you don't use it in the inguinal pain as well. Okay. Yes, because it can cause bronchoconstriction, but depends on the situation. Naloxone is the antagonist, which you use in the poisoning situation. So when we have opioid poisoning, so you can use naloxone to antagonize it. So it's a competitive antagonist of mu and kappa receptors, and 10-fold higher affinity. It's given as an IV treatment for poisoning of full agonists like morphine. So someone comes in with morphine overdose, you can give naloxone, but naloxone, remember, it's a very short half-life. So you need to give it frequently. So you give it as a competitive antagonist, again, it will go away and again morphine will come back. So unless the morphine goes out of the system, you need to repeat the doses. Okay. Tolerance concept, like when a person, what is tolerance? Any idea? So it's a need, yeah. So it's you need to increase the dose to have the same effect. Okay, and people develop tolerance with opioids, but the tolerance is more like quickly developed against analgesia. So we don't get enough analgesia, and we need to increase the dose to achieve the same analgesia. But tolerance to mood and respiratory depression, again, there is, but slowly, it develops slowly, and there's no tolerance against constipation and neurosis. So like constipation is not relieved over time. Dependence, again, we have dependence as well, and if you withdraw, we get like the withdrawal symptoms, and that will depend on on the patient and the drug and the length of the usage. So we have opioid effects, the withdrawal effects will be opposite of it. So analgesia with the withdrawal, patient will have increased pain, sedation is the opioid effect, so they will have agitation, poor sleep. In withdrawal, euphoria will lead to dysphoria, pinpoint pupil, dilated pupil. So you can see the, like, it will be the opposite, the withdrawal. Yes. Tolerance, as I said, it's the, like, you need to increase the dose to produce the same effect. So suppose if I'm taking oxycodone for pain, after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I need to increase the dose to again relieve the same pain. Like the pain relief, I don't achieve the same pain relief with the same dose. That's tolerance. Dependence is like, if I'm not, I will have the withdrawal symptoms. So I kind of get addicted to it. I need to take it. So there's a slight difference. Yes.
So the respiratory is lower tolerance, slower tolerance.
No, that what I'm trying to say. So the effect of respiratory depression does not go down over a period of time that quickly, but this, the analgesia, like people need to increase dose to achieve the same analgesia.
So it will be
But-
respiratory.
Yeah, so it's a risk factor. So that's what happens. That's what we say that it's a big problem. I have 3 scenarios very quickly in 2-3 minutes. A patient after an orthopedic surgery was administered morphine for pain relief, but there was not adequate pain relief. He was in pain. Okay. Now the person who was on duty replaced morphine with pentazocine. So he gave him the pentazocine. What will happen? So will his pain be relieved with pentazocine, or it will remain same, or it will become worse? It will become worse because whatever morphine was doing little bit, now this pentazocine will replace the morphine. Pentazocine will have some analgesic effect through kappa, but the mu, which is the major like analgesic receptor, from there morphine will be replaced. So, and it will be antagonized. So the patient will be in more pain. Okay. So you don't use them concomitantly. Scenario 2, a 21-year-old man was brought to the ER with unconsciousness, respiratory depression. Okay, so you see sedation, overdose, became unconscious, respiratory depression, unable to breathe. So this is opioid overdose. Okay, you note pinpoint pupil, so miosis. Okay, pinpoint pupil, or constricted pupil, or miosis, same thing. So you know it's opioid overdose. His friends state that the patient was seen injecting something IV at a party, after which time he became unresponsive. So it's most likely some opioid drug, whether heroin or morphine or something. Okay. So explain. So you know, because this we don't have time to go into these, but like you know these effects are sedation, unconsciousness, respiratory depression, pinpoint pupil, effects of the opioid, opioid effects, and because of the overdose. And how would you manage this patient? Antagonist with what? Naloxone. So a known heroin addict was brought to the ER by his family in unconscious state based on the history of his examination. Like you have all these things, you suspect opioid overdose. Okay, so you give naloxone as you said. Now he regains his consciousness, improves his, as like respiratory depression is improved. Within 40 minutes, the patient became unconscious once again and went into respiratory depression. What is happening? Not dependence. It's a short half-life of naloxone. So you need to repeat the dose because naloxone has a shorter half-life. So until the morphine or the heroin goes out of the system, so it will take few hours. Until then, you need to repeat those after a shorter duration, like half an hour, whatever is recommended. Okay. So otherwise, like because it's a competitive antagonism. Naloxone was competitive to antagonizing at the mu receptors, and so it came in, it antagonized heroin, and patient came back. But again, because it's shorter half-life, it goes away and heroin comes back. So it's competitive antagonism. Okay. If you have any questions, just let me know now and probably later as well. So, should I stop recording now? Okay.
A question.
Yes.
So you mentioned that endorphins, it increases for exercise, right?
Yeah, they are released with exercise as well.
And one of the problems with it is that it decreases LH and FSH. So I wanted to ask, is that the reason why women who exercise too much, they lose their menstrual cycle disrupt? Is it related to that?
To be honest, I don't know the answer to that. But in my view, not related to that,
Okay.
because it doesn't happen with the normal exercise in females. It happens with the excessive exercise,
Yeah.
like in athletes.
Yeah.